So, your next speaker is incredibly handsome, even smarter than he is handsome, and now you guessed it, it's me, yeah. We've heard a lot just now about how important your role is in your own healthcare. And I'm going to go more into how important your role is in your health. They're slightly different. So my talk is entitled Taking the Wheel. And this is very much about how you can change your approach to your health so that you have more control of it going forward. All right? So, this is me. This is me back 2 years ago in Hackney at Homerton Hospital, acting as Jaivala for my colleagues. I'm a doctor. I trained at Oxford under some very good tutelage, as you can see. And I'm founder of Hippocrates Lounge, which is a bespoke lifestyle clinic for chronic illness. My story, in brief, is that I became a doctor out of a genuine desire to help people. I derive a deep sense of satisfaction from it. Now, what I actually found when I was practicing is that we tended to manage symptoms. We didn't get to root causes, and we really didn't actually have the time to delve into that properly, let alone eventually lead that to cure. It's very much a sense of firefighting. You hear these stories all the time. There are lots of books about it. This is going to hurt is a popular one at the moment. So, I wondered whether the sense that I had on the ground was really something that was at a population level a problem. So, this is how much money we're spending on healthcare. 125 billion. But where is it all going? Why are people not getting better? Maybe it's the types of conditions that we're dealing with. 70% of that spending, so that's 88 billion, is going on long-term conditions. So that's not your heart attacks, your broken bones, that's your diabetes, your sort of anginas, your arthritis, right? These are longer-term conditions, and then they're not things you cure in the acute phase. And actually, those are taking up more than half of GP appointments, more than 60% of outpatient clinic appointments, and over 70% of inpatient beds. So you can see that actually, and when we've got a healthcare system that's better equipped for the acute care, actually the bigger burden is in the long term where we're not as well equipped. Everything's developed from the idea of 999, right? So we've oriented our services to that. They're designed for that. When we're trying to cover too many bases, we're not necessarily covering everything as best we can. So the next question is, what can we really do to improve the outcomes for those people? What are the factors that play in to how those long-term conditions play out for every individual? So here's a graph I took from a study in Minnesota. And let's just go through each of the factors one by one. There's 5 to go through. So your physical environment. How much has your doctor got to do with that? Your home, the streets you walk in? What do you think? No? I don't think I can influence that. Okay, so that's about you guys, really. You're the best place to influence that. Socioeconomic factors, your education, your income, your employment. What do I do? It's about you. Your health behaviors. Now this is the best one, because I want to do something about it, don't I? But who's actually in control? You guys. I can't tell you exactly what to eat. I can't spoon feed you, right? So, genes and biology. This is where it gets really interesting. How much influence do you guys think you have over this? None. That's what the common message is, isn't it? And actually, science is telling us something different now. So, with genes don't change, but the expression of them can. This phenomenon is called epigenetics. And what it means is that although your genes do not change, the way they're expressed does change. And that's in response to your environment. Things like your nutrition, your exercise, radiation, temperature, all of these things factor in. And they are things you can control. So next time someone tells you there's no way that you can alter your genes, not strictly true. You can't change them for what they are, but you can change what happens as a result of them. The next interesting thing, who's heard of the microbiome? Okay, there's a few. This is an interesting idea that's come in recently. And we've only come to understand it sort of in the last couple of years really, really well. So we have bacteria in and around our bodies, 10 to 100 trillion of them. Most of them are located in the gut, and they have evolved with us. So we work together in order to produce everything that we're experiencing now. So, and actually their genes outnumber our genes by 100 to 1. So they're having way more impact than we even think they are. it's thought to contribute to up to 90% of diseases that we experience. So this is really key. And actually, when most of them are located in the gut, what do you think is going to influence them? Food. Yeah? So this is important. So the biology and genes element, you've got control over. It might be a limited degree, but you have got control over. So actually, and we come to our last part now, clinical care contributes 10%. No wonder I felt I couldn't do anything, huh? So this is very much about you. 90% of this is you. Your health needs you. Okay? And this is something we've known since the beginning of modern medicine. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, said it's more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but the idea here is that my diabetes would not be the same as any of yours. What's contributed to mine is not the same as what's led you to be in the position you are today. What gets me out of that is very different to what will get you out of that. And this is something we've known for generations, but we've not been leveraging as much as we can. And the system isn't necessarily designed for that right now. So this is where your ownership of things comes in. So, how do we start? If you're going to go anywhere, you've got to know where exactly you're ending up, right? Set a goal. I don't know how many people in this room have had a doctor ask them what they would like to achieve, what their health goals are. So this is something you have to take ownership of, because if you don't tell them, they're never going to know, right? And we aren't trained to ask that question. We're very focused on, other questions that are defined about medicine and the background medical history and that kind of thing. But a health goal is a very different thing, and that's where your values start to influence your health care. So maybe you do have a chronic disease. Maybe you're diabetic, your energy levels are low, you want to control that better so that you can keep your energy levels up. Maybe you've got a chronic pain issue. Maybe you've got arthritis in your knees. It's stopping you playing with your kids, your grandkids. Maybe you want to focus more on the physio side of things to get that problem solved. Maybe you're chronically stressed. Suk will talk about this more later, but stress is a massive problem. Mental health diseases go on undiagnosed for lots of time, and actually it's a spectrum. We're probably all on it in some degree. We get stressed in any given moment, right? This is something where, if it's your key burden, then you want to think about how to calm your mind. So that's a way to start thinking about your goals. Have a little think about what each of yours are now. Keep them mentally, because it's going to be relevant later when we get more practical about things. We want you to take something home as an individual today that you can work on. So we talked about what kind of things we're going to influence in our lifestyles. Hippocrates said it back in the day. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine thy food. So that's where we'll start. Who feels like this when they think about the word diet? It's overwhelming, isn't it? How many articles are there every day? This thing's bad for you, this thing's good for you. Butter was once the devil. Now it's not, is it? I don't know. You tell me. Your guess is as good as mine. It's not really fair to be able to ask anyone to take all that information in and tell you exactly what to do. And that applies to you as an individual, but it also in some ways applies to me as a doctor. But what does help, when you know what your goal is, you can focus things around that. There are certain diets that are relevant for particular diseases. Research them, trial them. These things are safe. If there's any safety concerns, be careful, talk to someone about it. But actually, once you know your goal and where you're trying to get to, there are lots of options here. They're all slightly different. Take note of that, because this helps guide you throughout the whole process of optimizing your lifestyle. So, when it comes to eating, no diet will expressly mention this. I'm going to go through a series of principles. I imagine people probably thought I was going to tell you about the next crazy good diet today. And that's not what anyone really can do, because the reality is with each diet, they work for certain people and maybe in a certain part of their life. You end up with a lot of people promoting certain diets that worked with them, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. So I want to empower you to figure out this stuff in terms of what works for you. So, no diet will mention this, but preparing food yourself is the only way you know exactly what's gone into it, right? You cannot know that any other way. How it's been prepared, how it's been cooked, or it's been slow cooked, long cooked, or it was too hot. All of these things. You can only know that by making it yourself. I've gone through all of the diets that are in vogue right now, and I can tell you there are certain ingredients that are good in every diet. They're ubiquitous. So let's go through them real quick. Cruciferous vegetables. Cabbage, Sprouts, even not at Christmas, let's get them in. Yeah, cabbage, sprouts, broccoli, and cabbage. These guys are your friends. Get them in early. Leafy greens. Everyone's talking about kale as a superfood. Yeah, anything leafy and green, it's good. It fills you up. Actually, I think what you start to realize when you start implementing these changes, they can keep you fuller for a lot longer, especially those cruciferous vegetables. So, and the next one, everyone loves these boys, don't they? Avocado. Unfortunately, actually, when avocado became a bit of a theme and a craze, the number of hand injuries related to avocado cutting went up. So no wonder my time in A&E was so busy, huh? But yeah, these guys are really good fats. And then olive oil, but get the extra virgin stuff. Nothing else is really everything else is a bit too processed, okay? So be aware of that kind of thing. Obviously, we can't forget our good friend water. People used to, when I went to school, it was 70% of your body, now people talk about 90%. The reality is, water is the key component for any reaction that's going on in your body, right? It needs this. So there's no substitute for getting a lot of good water in, okay? Most of us are probably chronically dehydrated. Those day-to-day mild headaches, I imagine they're probably related to hydration, although there's no study that can tell me that. Now, you knew this was coming, didn't you? So we all do it. I'm as guilty as anyone, and this is as much about just trying to build have the framework in place that you can keep things going in a generally good place. But the ideals are no takeaways. Again, for the reason we said before, you don't actually know what's gone into it. That's the worst in that sense, because you don't have details on the ingredients, you don't have details on preparation. What would you know? Then when you're shopping, if anything has more than 5 ingredients, be wary. Because, or if it has anything you don't actually understand, sodium glucoalginate, what is that? Is that something I've ever eaten as an ingredient on its own? Is that something I could eat raw? I don't think so. So those sorts of things, be wary of the food labels. The ideal with any ingredient you're going to use is that you should pick it up and know what it is. I pick up a piece of broccoli, I know what that is. It doesn't need an ingredient label. Sugary drinks. So this is a pet peeve of mine. So obviously Coke and fizzies, Fanta, we know those are all bad. Diet says it's not got sugar in it, but then there's a heavy amount of processing. So if you follow rule number 2 here, actually it counts that out too. Then we come on to things like juices and squash, and they are sugar in terms of the fruit without the fiber that normally comes with it naturally. What the fiber does is it helps you to metabolize it in a way that there aren't knock-on effects. And where you don't have the fiber, there's actually ways in which it's metabolized that are similar to alcohol in the long term. And that's what leads to a lot of the sort of chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity, etc. today. That contributes to it. There's a great lecture by a chap called Robert Lustig on YouTube. He's a chap from UCSF. He goes into the biochemistry for any of you that are interested. So, this is actually a relatively simple one, but it's an aspirational one at the same time. It's not necessarily something you can do tomorrow, but this is the ideal. So, try and get organic ingredients. That's quite easy to do in ASDA. I think when it comes to meats, try and aim for grass-fed meats. When it comes to dairy, grass-fed butters, so that's from cows that have been fed grass only. When it comes to fish, try and get wild caught. So those are just some simple things that you can implement, just altering the ingredients you're buying already. One thing that chefs talk about massively, but doctors aren't necessarily as concerned about, is the time it takes from you getting your food from the source to when it gets to your plate. Now, in their interest, it's about flavor. But in my interest and the way my thinking around this works is, as soon as it's, your vegetables picked or your fish is caught, you've got a certain amount of energy and nutrition in it. That's waning the longer it takes to get to your plate. So, as much as you can, try and get to source. And that's things like farmers markets would be ideal in that sense. And building like that's again also very helpful to your local community, local economy, and those sorts of things. But these, if as much as you can get these high quality ingredients that you know really where they've come from and that there's been care in them, that's got a huge role to play. Variety. So, very colourful image here. If you can get your plate looking like that, I'll be really impressed. Try and aim for 3 colours on your plate. What it means is that you're getting a wide variety of vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. And it's a really simple way to look at things, right? So I've already talked about a load of different things, and some of them may not be realistic for you to implement today. Earmark the ones that are, but if you take away one rule about eating, I'd like you to take this one. So I think we don't make conscious decisions around food. We don't really think, what am I eating? And I think we need processes to figure out what we're doing and also what it's doing to us. So this is a process that I've worked with. It's worked really well for people around me. So whatever you're eating, make a note. The easiest way I found is just to take a photo. You can even send it to other people around you that care about you, so that you've got some level of accountability as to what you're eating. More important than that is checking in with yourself, say half an hour to an hour later, and actually just considering, how am I doing? How is this affecting me? What's the relationship here? You know, sometimes we get very immediate reactions like bloating or belching, but if you don't build up that data over time for yourself, you don't know what the source is. On a personal level, for years, I went to weddings, came away with bloating, massive, really uncomfortable. But actually, I've started reducing my portion size at weddings. I only eat so much now, and I don't get that problem. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't consciously check in about what I'm doing and how my body's responding. So over time, the trend data will tell you where to make your changes. So yes, this isn't a diet, but it is a means of you figuring out what foods work for you. This may change over time. It's not to say you have to cut things out forever. You may be able to experiment with it. But that data tells you a lot as an individual, right? Maybe at some point when you're really used to it, you don't even need to take the photos and whatnot. But it does tell you a lot. So next thing, exercise. Who thought we were going to talk about that today? Yeah, so Hippocrates, our good friend, said walking is man's best medicine. So let's start there. Simple targets that we can work with. So let's talk about setting some realistic goals. The major problem when it comes to movement is that, our ancestors would have been running around all day. Even 2 generations ago, we would have been laborers doing lots of work, and the kind of foods we were taking to have the energy in order to do those activities is not equivalent to what we're eating in relation to our activity levels now. We sit too much, right? So set realistic targets like aim for 10,000 steps a day. Now, if you've got mobility issues, you might want to build up as you're capable. That's fine. But just have some sort of number to aim for. The fact that you've got a goal means that you're working towards something better than your current situation. And then this is the reason I got you up to stretch a little bit earlier. The fact that we sit too much is a massive problem. We all have postural issues. Those of us in the office these days, how many of us are just sat cooped over a laptop like this? How many of us have that tension in the back of our neck, right? Get up every 30 minutes. Give yourself a bit of a break. It probably helps you actually with your productivity in the long run, right? And actually, in terms of office, there's lots of standing desks that are happening these days. Look into those. There are options. Don't think that just because you've been given a chair, it has to be like that. So, this one is in the same way that I wanted you to build your awareness of your food, build an awareness of your body. So, whenever you are moving, try and respond to what it's telling you. If there are areas of tightness, you might want to stretch them out. Obviously, there's a risk of overstretching, so start slow. But actually, when you listen to what the problem might be in advance, it doesn't develop into a problem. For instance, personal example again, I know when I'm running or jogging or whatnot that my right hip is tighter than my left. I spend extra time stretching the right hip so that doesn't develop into a problem. What would develop it into a problem is me compensating in the movement that I do, and then that leads to imbalances later. Does that make sense? So, where you are having fun with movement, just keep doing it, right? If you like to dance, go and do more of it. Because the reality is we're not as active as we used to be. So just take the opportunities where you can get them. This has a huge social element to it too. Whatever your hobby is, do more of it. So, who's big on gym work here? I know a couple of people, I don't know when to point you out, so just lift up your hands now. Cool. So I think this is one thing to bear in mind along with the stretching point. So I think when it comes to gym work, it's all well and good being able to lift a huge weight, but I don't know how many of you actually do this movement that this guy's doing in some functional manner in your day-to-day life. Can anyone think of one? I'm all ears.
When you're lifting up the pram.
Oh, yeah. Well, I tend to do it, I don't know, I tend to do it like that, so. That's all the more reason not to do it, I think. Okay, so look, if you can't actually move after doing your gym work, what is it really giving you, right? I shouldn't be compromising my ability to move just to get a higher weight on the list. Yeah? So if I can squat 100 kilos, but I can't actually squat right down, right? What's the point? If I can't get down here, it doesn't matter how much I lift, right? Because there are going to be times where you actually need to make that movement. So just think about that. I want it to be sort of inclusive of everyone, and this point is just an awareness thing. So, who's heard of this term? What does it mean?
Meditation or anything which gives you...
Might be. I think that's a fair point. Okay. Good. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think that's the easiest way to try and describe it. I think it's a focus thing. It's a really hard term to define, and people have different ways of going about it. But actually, I think it's about focusing in the moment that you're currently in. So, eating is a very good example, actually. I can focus on many things in that experience and build layers to it. I'm chewing. What are the different flavors? Is it salty? Is it sweet? Is it sour? Right? There are layers to your experience that help you focus in on what you are doing rather than worrying about what you aren't. Right? And that's the stuff that turns into stress. That's the stuff you can't influence right now, that there's no point thinking about. So focus on now. So sleep. It's an easy thing to monitor nowadays. How many of you use an app to monitor your sleep? No one? 2, 3, 4. Awesome. So Sleep Cycle is one that I use. Any of you with a smartphone, look for an equivalent, because it can give you a little bit of a sense of how your sleep is going. It gives you a quality metric. It gives you a sense of how many, over time it gives you a sense of how many hours you're actually logging in sleep. You should be aiming for 7 to 8. But the thing is, when it's off, and you don't necessarily need an app to tell you when you're not sleeping well, right? But when it's off, there are simple things that you can do. Think about your caffeine intake. Don't have it too late in the day, right? And actually, there's a process to weaning caffeine that can be quite arduous, but this in the long term is really important. Eating dinner too late can really knock you for 6 when it comes to trying to get to sleep. And then screen time. I know I've just said use your smartphone. Maybe don't. Maybe just use it just before you get into the bedroom, or set the alarm ahead of time, right? And then just spend a little bit of time giving your eyes a break. When light goes into your eyes, that's a stimulus for you to be awake and alert. That's what the sun naturally did for us back in the day, right? But we're doing the same thing in our bedroom. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't know about you guys. So, the last thing, a big community thing. And that's why we're doing things like this. I think this is something we have a lot of, and we're lucky to have as a community here. I think this is something you can build on. Any hobbies that you have, you can make them social, right? I might like to play drafts or chess. Chess clubs exist everywhere, right? So there's an easy way to make everything social. And the reason this is relevant is because there's clear data associating social isolation with poor health outcomes. Essentially, in the worst way of describing it, you're more likely to die if you're isolated, right? And actually, even if you're not, you're more likely to get those mental problems that we talked about earlier. So make things sociable. If you're integrating any things in your day-to-day routine, like the walks that we talked about, maybe you can do those with a partner or a loved one. Yeah? And then I think one thing that we don't have enough of is open dialogue around health. And that's what we're hoping to generate a bit more of today. Be willing to share that with those people. That way, problem shared is a problem halved. So, backtracking through everything that we talked about. We have gone through why your health is about you, right? Is everyone clear on that? 90% of this is about you. We've gone through the things in your lifestyle that actually have a lot more relevance than you previously thought in terms of your genes and microbiome, etc. So you can eat, move, think, sleep, and relate better. And I've given you a few tips as to how you might be able to do that. One thing to bear in mind is that these are all interlinked. So if I'm not sleeping properly, I can't think straight. If I'm not thinking straight, I'm more likely to binge eat on the stuff that's just going to make me feel comfortable, rather than actually make me feel good later on. And that makes me just really irritable when it comes to trying to speak to Uncle before the big event. So try and do at least one thing from each of these brackets, and we'll try and just maintain an idea in your mind about which ones you can really take away. Try and take away one from each. So that 10% that's left, where we can help. When it comes to some of the bigger interventions, or things are getting a little bit more complex, or you have a complicated health goal, or you've implemented changes like this and you don't feel like it's working, involve your GP. They know you best, they've got that continuity with you, and when it comes to stuff that's potentially unsafe, they can guide you on that. One thing that's a little bit different is that there is a school of thinking called functional medicine, which is very much about the system of the body as a whole and very experienced in terms of lifestyle interventions thereafter. I've trained in this discipline recently, so if you want any help in that specific regard, email me at drdil@hippocrateslounge.com or just go to my website, the email's there, okay? The last thought I want to leave you with on this talk, going back to our old pal Hippocrates again. Healing is a matter of time, but it's sometimes a matter of opportunity. I'm hoping that that opportunity is today for some of us. So let's try and bear that thought in mind as we go on with the rest of the day. Any questions? Right.
So would it just be possible for you to you've taken our email addresses to email the slides to us? That would be really helpful. I know you're putting it on YouTube.
Yeah.
You can just email the slides. Is that possible?
We could potentially do. We can put them online potentially.
Yeah, we'll put something on. But
I think even the way we do the YouTube, you should be able to see the slides anyway. So we'll have a think about that and get back to you on it. Yeah.
What's your view on supplements?
Okay, my personal opinion on supplements is that if you're eating a really well-balanced diet, I don't think you should need any. But sometimes there are specific goals that you might have where supplements are relevant. So actually, the reason I started with the goal setting is because it all comes back to that. If you've got a particular thing you're trying to achieve, you might find something that's relevant for that, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think.
What do you think about? Do you think they're actually absorbed? Do you reckon by availability?
Okay, that's going to vary supplement by supplement. If you go to examine.com, they've got lots of data that will tell you everything about each supplement individually.
There's lots of garbage on the market, so
There
we'll
is,
talk
yeah.
about that a bit later on.
You're talking a lot about how obviously diet can influence your health and recommending going to the GP and discussing things with them. What if your GP is unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with the idea or the impact that diet can have? What would you recommend?
So I think that's a key point. Sometimes we feel like we're at odds with the healthcare professionals that we're working with, and that's fair enough. Hopefully they're practicing values-based practice, in which case they'll listen to you before they make a decision. However, I think this is a case of making them aware, and when and where tests are relevant, they can run them for you, right? So if I'm going on a particularly strenuous regime of fasting, they might be checking my nutritional levels, and they can run those tests at time points for you potentially. Having that back and forth dialogue is important. I think if you have an idea of what you'd like to get out of them before you go in as well with that particular question is really helpful. The truth with that is that it's going to vary by GP, and I can't really help that for you, unfortunately. However, I think if you have a specific goal, say, especially when it comes to diabetes or high blood pressure, those sorts of things, they can definitely help you with.
Would consulting a dietitian as well, making maybe that a regular
Yeah.
practice, is that useful?
So dietitians or nutritional therapists, there are options. That's why I mentioned the functional medicine practitioners, because they have a little bit more experience when it comes to stuff like this. But again, that's something that if you have a specific target and you don't feel like the day-to-days are working, check.
Thanks for telling us what the right foods are to eat, because there are a lot of articles written online, and every week, like you're saying, it's changing. Another thing that I think, if you are looking into this, people notice online is not necessarily what you're eating, but how you eat it and timings of what you eat. And fasting is a big thing these days. What are your views on that, and is there a right way, from your experience, to eat?
So this you're going to get tired of me saying this, but it's about your goals. So intermittent fasting has its role, and we'll talk about it later in relation to some particular stuff, particular conditions. I think sometimes you have other priorities, and it doesn't make sense for you to try and fast. But if you know what your target is, so we'll talk about fasting in relation to diabetes later, for instance, right? If I know I want to deal with my diabetes and fasting is an option based on the data out there, then I can work with that, right? I think day to day, when it comes to being healthier, it's actually really hard to find a lot of data out there that just focuses on that. So often it's a reference point thing to people that are really fit and healthy and are doing their thing. But the reason that I wanted you to focus on building a sense of what works for you, that's what the journaling process does, right? Because, you know, I've tried fasting on and off for a while, but it doesn't necessarily make my body actually any more like what I wanted it to look like. So I haven't always stuck to it, or I haven't done the most stringent regimes. That's more of an experimental thing, I think. But what I think is a good thing that I've been able to put together for you is those ingredients that are available in every diet. If you get those first, you're already 80% of the way there, right? No matter what time of day you're eating, or how often.
What if your goals aren't orientated to getting better, having had a condition diagnosed, but instead if you're young and you just want to optimize your health?
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. So when it comes to intermittent fasting, there are characters out there that are doing a lot of it. So someone like Terry Crews is a great example. So he's a comedian, actor, really, really well built and stocky. If he's the guy, he's the kind of build you want to go for. He's big on intermittent fasting. So learn about how he approaches it. Would be my stance on that. There is data out there, and I actually wrote a paper on this a few years ago about, you know, how fasting might relate to. I wrote on how fasting might relate to brain health and the aging of the brain. Fasting in particular, the interest in it has been around slowing down aging. And I think if you don't have any other specific health goals, it's actually something worth considering, right? But don't make it compromise everything else that you're trying to work towards. It's really wishy-washy, and I don't think there's a perfect regime, actually. I think that's why if you know what you're trying to achieve with it, it's way more important. I think as far as getting sort of a wellness angle or aging well, I think that's fairly reasonable to try it. But be careful about which regime.